to Palm Beach County, Florida, and this was just last week. And in Palm Beach County, Florida, he took about 3 hours of flight time in a Piper aircraft. He said he wanted to get his skills back, a refresher course. From there, he went to Boston, Massachusetts. He rented a car there at an Alamo rental car. He drove it on the morning of the hijacking to Portland, Oregon, and then took an early flight from Portland back to Boston, and then back on that ill-freighted aircraft that flew into the World Trade Center tower. Now, Mohammed Atta is an interesting figure. One of the things we have to look out for here is that there are several different people around the world with the same names, but we've talked to Israeli sources who said they have been seeking a Mohammed Atta, a Palestinian. They said he's been wanted for terrorist acts in Israel, but we are not sure if it's the same individual. Aaron?
There's a phenomenal amount of detail there. Let me ask a couple of questions. First of all, do the names themselves tell us anything about where their allegiances, whether, look, the question here is, do they have a connection, and can we tell that by their names, to bin Laden or anyone else who might be of interest right now?
Well, we're attempting to do that, and intelligence officials have been trying to do that for a couple of days now when they got those names together. We do know that more than half of the names are either prominent Saudi names from the south of that country or Yemeni names. But I was told by one source there is the possibility that these names may not be the real names of the actual hijackers. I have the bin Laden manual for Al-Qaeda that's issued to followers of bin Laden, in which they talk about using cutouts, so to speak, stealing somebody's identity. It's a tactic they use all the time, so it's something we got to be really careful. There could be some names on this list that maybe there's another Mohammed Atta out there, and so we're trying to be very careful. But certainly the FBI must have a lot of confidence in this, Aaron, to release this as it is right now.
We see the president, Mike, as you were talking, walking up the steps, getting into Air Force One for his trip to New York. Assume Air Force One will be pulling away shortly. Mike, if you're still there.
Yes, I am.
We know now, or at least we have 19 names that we believe are either real names or aliases of some sort of the hijackers. Is there much you can tell us about the broader investigation that's going on in Germany, in parts of the United States as well, for people who may have either information about what went on or may have been complicit in one way in what went on?
Well, let me tell you, good intelligence sources worldwide are telling me that one of the groups they're looking at that could have been one of the major groups behind this is Egyptian Islamic Jihad. Now, that group has close ties to bin Laden. It operates under the umbrella, oftentimes, of Al-Qaeda, which is the umbrella organization run by bin Laden. Al-Qaeda itself is not a group. It's more like the corporate board, and these companies, these smaller groups which work in cells of 18 to 20 people, they are the ones that go out and do it. They're looking very close at these North African groups, some Algerian groups and that. Now, that's not to say, when I say Egyptian Islamic Jihad or an Algerian terror group like GIA, that's not to say they're operating from those countries. For example, Egyptian Islamic Jihad members have had to flee Egypt because President Mubarak has been very successful in tracking those people down, put a lot of heat on them. And so these cells from that organization have been operating in Afghanistan and also in areas of Pakistan for the last few years. So that is obviously the neighborhood of bin Laden. And that's one of the groups they're looking at.
Mike, thanks. Again, it is remarkable how much detail that investigators have been able to put together in a relatively short period of time, and we assume, as seems reasonable, at least here, that that's just what they are telling us, that very likely, they have a whole lot more detail on these 19 men and their movements and their connections and the rest, and we'll be continuing to work on that. It is also, I think, quite remarkable to a good many Americans that you could find 19 people out there, perhaps more, who have such hatred for the United States that they would not only commit this awful act that went on in New York and in Washington and kill themselves in the process. It is less difficult for people abroad to imagine that. They see this kind of hatred directed at the United States perhaps more than we do here normally. Christiana Amanpour now on why the United States has such problems in the world.
These pictures of Palestinians celebrating the terrorist attack on the United States horrified all those who were in mourning. Palestinian leaders were quick to point out that these were only isolated incidents by what they called an ignorant few, and Chairman Yasser Arafat immediately condemned the attacks.
We are completely shocked, unbelievable.
Later, Arafat was seen giving blood in a symbolic gesture of solidarity with America. Arab allies, the Iranian president, and even Libya have strongly condemned what happened, saying that it violates Islamic principles. But on the streets of all these countries, anti-Americanism has been building. Moderates are being eclipsed by extremists after almost a year of violence in the Middle East, the Palestinian Intifada in Israel. We don't wish for the destruction of the American people, says this man. We just want the destruction of Bush and the U.S. Congress because they support Israel. Experts in radical Islamic terrorism say masterminds like Osama bin Laden have cleverly manipulated a real sense of grievance into a willingness by some to become human instruments of mass murder.
Osama bin Laden has been in the Muslim world. Has been capitalizing on very sensitive issues that mobilize the whole Arab and Muslim community. The liberation of Jerusalem, American troop presence in Saudi Arabia, of course the fate of the Iraqi people suffering under sanctions.
This gathered momentum after the Gulf War, when bin Laden bitterly complained about U.S. troops in Saudi Arabia, troops invited by Saudi leaders to defend against the Iraqis, and yet condemned by bin Laden and extremist Islamic preachers for, quote, desecrating holy sites. In addition, Muslims all over the world have been enraged by a decade of continued bombing against Iraqi military installations and crippling sanctions that have ended up hurting the Iraqi people much more than their intended target, Saddam Hussein and his regime. Experts say terrorism cells manage to operate in America's Arab allies, such as Egypt and Saudi Arabia, as well as Europe and North America. Fearful of a backlash, mainstream Muslim leaders here in Europe are trying to explain that this war on American civilians is a crime that can never be justified as a religious duty.
The position of the Muslim community in the UK, as I'm sure in different parts of the world, is very clear. We condemn utterly and unequivocally the atrocities that has been committed. We believe that the people, the perpetrators of this heinous crime are outside the pale of civilization.
So now, British and other world leaders are calling for a global alliance to combat a global network of terrorism, to arrest them cell by cell, shut down their financial support, and make it more difficult to forge travel documents. There are no quick fixes, they say, just a long, sustained, and difficult campaign. Christiana Amanpour, CNN, London.
President Bush is making his way to New York City. We also expect within perhaps 10-15 minutes a briefing by the Secretary of State Powell. You see Air Force One and Andrews will be heading this way. Out in Seattle right now, across the country, there is a memorial going on, firefighters' memorial going on, Amazing Grace. Let me just listen to this for a moment. Among the dignitaries there, the Governor Gary Locke, but as you can tell, this is not about dignitaries. This is about people, in this case Seattleites, who have come together for their moment together. Being together matters in times like this. Seattle is acutely sensitive to these sorts of issues, these terrorist issues. Seattleites believe they might have been a target at the Millennium celebration when a suspected terrorist, someone who indeed had a plan or was part of a group that had a plan, was caught at the Blaine, Washington Canadian border with the makings of explosives that caused Seattle to cancel its Y2K celebration and had the city quite on edge for some time. Here in New York, many of the people who were hurt, the survivors of the blast on Tuesday, are still hospitalized. A good many, in fact, have been let go, are home and recuperating and getting back to the normal routine of their lives. Many others, of course, are not, and their conditions range from they're getting okay to still quite risky. Brian Palmer is at St. Vincent Hospital, which is in Lower Manhattan, and Brian joins us now. Brian?
Aaron, good afternoon. It is still a wet and dreary afternoon out here. As you can see, normal or close to a normal flow of traffic, things getting back to normal. Volunteers are still doing their thing, but we have seen a slowing of a number of ambulances coming in. We spoke to a hospital spokesman who was saying that because of the slippery and treacherous conditions, they were expecting more people to come in. They're disappointed they haven't seen all that many people coming in, meaning that perhaps they're pulling fewer people from the actual blast zone. But today, we've actually heard from some of the voices of survivors recovering at St. Vincent's. Two people, Arturo Griffith and Fareed Paul.
I finally spoke to my wife yesterday, and as I was talking with her, she was listening to my voice, and she didn't believe still. She thought I was dead, and we was exchanged, and because she was crying, and I was crying too.
I saw the World Trade Center on fire. I saw that, and I saw people in the window waving white sheets, and that's what breaks my heart. It was a heart-wrenching noticing these people were trapped up there, and there's no way of them being rescued, and that really hurt me. And also seeing my own two eyes, that plane coming out of nowhere in slow motion and turning and hitting directly into the building it's just unreal. It's just unreal. It's something I'll never forget for the rest of my life.
Now, both Mr. Paul and Mr. Griffith suffered severe injuries to their legs. They couldn't get out on their own. They were rescued by Good Samaritans who hand-carried them down flights of steps and brought them to their safety. Now, today we also had a visit from New York Governor George Pataki. He spoke to some of the doctors here and some of the survivors. His message was one of thanks, but he also expressed some concern that fewer people were being brought here from the blast zone. But he said, quote, "Miracles happen. There still could be some people brought up here." That was the message today, Aaron.
Brian, before we let you get away, as you know, so far today at least, no survivors from the blast itself have been found, taken to the hospital. I suspect now that anybody who's coming into the hospital is very likely a rescue worker who's been hurt on the scene. It's very slippery, kind of mucky. That all that dust has turned to mud down there. Is that what's happening?
Well, that is definitely the case. As of this morning, St. Vincent's had not seen any actual new blast victims in 36 hours, so that was close to 8 hours ago. What we did learn from the Greater New York Hospital Association is that the website for patient information is in fact online now. It's up and running, www.nyc.gov, and you click on Patient Locator System. So this is the official information clearinghouse of the Office of Emergency Management. This is not one of the fly-by-night websites. This is where people should go for their information on loved ones who may still be missing. Aaron?
Brian, thanks. It's unimaginable in some ways that you could go this many days, or at least what it might feel like to go this many days, not know if someone you love is dead or alive, hurt, what their situation is. Our hearts go out. We're joined now by Brother Edward Coughlin. We were Somebody said a while ago that there are, I think it was Marty Savage, that there are thousands of stories down there, and there are, and we don't rank one above any of the others. But the story of Reverend Michael Judge is a particularly interesting and moving one to us. And Brother Coughlin was a dear friend, a longtime friend of Michael Judge, who was a chaplain with the fire service and died at the scene.
That's right.
Tell me, I want to talk about him in a second, but tell us, as you can, the circumstances that led to his death.
As far as we know, he was at the scene. It appears that he was hit with some debris. There was one report that he was administering the last rites of the church to someone when he was hit. The firemen found him, and there was a picture in the New York Times yesterday, page 2, that shows the firemen carrying him out.
Yeah.
They took him over to St. Peter's Church on Barclay Street and laid him in front of the altar and covered him, and it was kind of a real symbol, I think, of their great reverence and respect for him as one of their several chaplains who worked for the fire department.
Because you knew him a long time, and because one way or another I've been chasing fire engines for a long time, the fire departments are an extraordinary brotherhood or fraternity or whatever. They are a remarkably close group of people. They understand, and the Reverend was one of them. I want to find out more about who he was, but I need to interrupt us just a second because the Secretary of State is just starting his briefing, and we want to know what he has to say.
And the support that the Congress is giving to our efforts, it shows the United States as a nation, as a people, coming together in this time of crisis and showing our determination to move forward deliberately and decisively to deal with this particular incident, as well as the broader threat represented by world terrorism. I have been in touch with a number of officials, in addition to the cabinet meeting and the very moving memorial service that we just had up at the National Cathedral. Earlier in the morning, I spoke to the Foreign Minister of India, Mr. Singh, and was very pleased to receive an exceptionally strong statement of support from the Indian government, and we had heard that previously, but he confirmed it this morning. I've also had conversations with the Portuguese Foreign Minister, the Saudi Foreign Minister, Moroccan, Tunisian Foreign Ministers, my colleague, Foreign Minister Tanaka of Japan. I'll be speaking to the Israeli Defense Minister in a few moments, and I have a call into the Syrian Foreign Minister. And this will continue throughout the day for me. But beyond that, we have instructed our ambassadors around the world to go in and talk to their colleagues in those capitals to let them know how serious we are about this and begin to set the stage for any other requests we might have for them with respect to what we do as we go forward. In addition, our regional assistant secretaries here in the State Department have been inviting in ambassadors resident here in Washington to discuss the situation with them and to receive any questions they may have and to pass on any guidance that we have available to them. As you know, we are waiting to hear from President Musharraf of Pakistan, and I'm quite encouraged that the Pakistani government is taking this so seriously and so deliberately, and our ambassador is waiting for a reaction from them. I might also say that I'm pleased that the actions of the Australian government in activating the ANZUS Treaty as an expression of support, and a little similar to what NATO did, but those alliances that we hold dear and have used so effectively to keep us together as friendly nations over these many years are now, seems to me, paying off as people come forward to help us. I'm also pleased that expressions of support we have received from countries such as Turkmenistan and Kazakhstan and others are coming in. I don't have all of them on my list or in my memory, and Richard Boucher will, in the course of the day, let you know who we have heard from and what kind of responses we have received from them. And let me just stop there and take a couple of questions before I have to make a phone call.
Any indications of what the Pakistan, whether you get a positive response from Pakistan, you're going to call the Syrian, any indications yet of their position?
Yes, the Syrians, President Assad sent to President Bush a very strong letter of support in efforts against terrorism. Now, of course, we have had a mixed relationship with Syria over the years, and in the course of my conversation, hopefully this afternoon with my colleague, I'll pursue the spirit of the letter that President Assad sent to President Bush and see where that takes us.
And any indications from the Pakistanis, even though there's no final answer?
So far, I am very encouraged, but I think it's best that I do wait for a final answer.
Mr. Secretary, Indian media says that that government handed over some maps to you today of guerrilla camps and other training areas that Afghanistan is said to be using. Can you confirm that that's...
I can't confirm it. I just don't know. Richard could chase that down for you, but I can't confirm it here. It wasn't mentioned to me in my phone call at about 9 or 9:30 or 10, whenever I had, or about 10:30, I guess it was, with the Indian Foreign Minister.
Mr. Secretary, we've heard a lot, yourself and other cabinet members and officials say, as we reach out to countries and ask for help, you're either with us or you're against us. Now, of course, we hope that all countries are be with us, but if we ask for something from a country, we ask them to root out terrorism in all its forms or to provide logistical or any type of other support that we need for any eventual military response. If they decline, if they say that they won't do what the U.S. asks, what are the consequences for, quote, being against us?
I think we have to be careful as we go forward, and we intend to be. We're talking with countries that are friendly to us, and we will present requests to them and see what they are able to do within their capacity and within their political circumstances. But if we find a particular country, especially those that might be serving as a haven or is a well-known supporter of this kind of activity, and they are simply unresponsive, and we deem that unresponsiveness to be contributing to additional terrorism or to the fertile ground in which terrorism thrives, then that will certainly affect the kind of relationship we're going to have with them in the future. I am not threatening so much as I am saying this has become a new benchmark, a new way of measuring the relationship and what we can do together in the future and what kind of support we can provide to you in the future across a whole range of issues and activities.
Mr. Secretary, the last 2 days you've been saying that how important you think it is that despite the events here, the tragic events here, that it's still very, very important for the Israelis and the Palestinians to have high-level meetings between Chairman Arafat and former Mr. Peres. Now, Prime Minister Sharon has now called that meeting off. And secondly, you're speaking to the Israeli defense minister later. Are you going to bring up his comments that were quoted in an Israeli newspaper this morning, in which he said that the disasters in New York and here were a catastrophe for Arafat because the Israelis had killed 14 Palestinians since then and no one had noticed?
I don't know what we'll discuss. I haven't seen those comments, but I know him rather well, and I'm sure we'll have many things to discuss, but I won't prejudge what I might raise or what he might raise and announce it before he raises it or I raise it. I would still hope that a way is found for the Israelis and the Palestinians to meet. When they meet is a judgment for them to make. We have two leaders who have to judge their own interest. We believe a meeting is important to get the process started. This conflict isn't going away, and I don't think it's going to be solved by continuing conflict between the two sides. So I hope that conditions will present themselves soon so that a meeting can begin. But I think it is also fair to say that the events of the 11th of September have fundamentally changed the way in which people look at terrorism and acts of terrorism.
Secretary Pell, as your strategy to fight global terrorism begins to take shape and as these international coalitions that you've been trying to build solidify, it's obviously a very different war that you're preparing to fight, in that the enemy is not in one country. Could you explain this to us?
Yeah, I was raised a soldier, and you're trained. There is the enemy occupying a piece of ground. We can define it in time, space, and other dimensions, and you can assemble forces and go after it. This is different. The enemy is in many places. The enemy is not looking to be found. The enemy is hidden. The enemy is very often right here within our own country. And so you have to design a campaign plan that goes after that kind of enemy. And it isn't always blunt force military, although that is certainly an option. It may well be that the diplomatic efforts, political efforts, legal, financial, other efforts may be just as effective against that kind of an enemy as would military force be. And the point the President made this morning is that the whole cabinet's involved, and we're going to use all the tools and weapons at our disposal to fight this campaign and to win this war. I only have time for one more, and I apologize. Let me see, who haven't I... Go.
Do you have a message for the Taliban?
Yes. Is it a vote? That's the question? All right. The message is, to the extent that you are providing havens, support, encouragement, and other resources to organizations such as the organization headed by Mr. Osama bin Laden, that is attacking civilization, that is killing innocent people. And I would give this message to any other regime in any other country that might be doing similar things. To the extent that you are doing these sorts of things, even though we have not yet, notwithstanding words like prime suspect, we have not yet identified Osama bin Laden as the direct perpetrator, but the evidence, we have a lot of evidence is mounting, which will allow us to determine in the near future who it is. But he certainly is the leader of that kind of organization, and to the extent that governments such as the Taliban government in Afghanistan support such things, you need to understand you cannot separate your activities from the activity of these perpetrators. And in our response, we will have to take into account not only the perpetrators, but those who provide haven, support, inspiration, financial and other assets to the perpetrators, as the President said in his very first set of remarks some days ago. Thank you. I do have to go. Thank you.
Secretary of State Powell now going off to make more phone calls to foreign leaders. A couple of things he said jumped out at us. He was asked about his statement yesterday. He said, we're basically saying to other countries, you're either with us or you're against us on this question of terrorism. He said, today I'm not threatening those other countries, it's just a fact of life. And then when he talked about Afghanistan and its possible harboring of terrorists, including Osama bin Laden, he said you'll be held accountable if that's what it turns out to be. He also said the Syrians have sent a strong letter of support and characterized that relationship diplomatically as mixed, somewhat more contentious than that. Turn again to Brother Edward Coughlin, who, before we went to Secretary of State Powell, we were talking about his good friend, Reverend Michael Judge, who was a chaplain for the fire department and died on Tuesday, ministering, doing what his job was, ministering to last rites to a fireman down on the scene. Was it a fireman down on the scene? He was.
We believe so.
Yeah,
that's the report.
And he was carried out by another firefighter, as I recall the story.
There was actually a picture that appeared on page 2 of the New York Times. It says an unidentified fireman, but in fact it was Father Michael being carried out by about 5 other firemen who found him, and they're the ones that brought him to St. Peter's Church and put him in the sanctuary there so that his body would be protected. And it was a great, I think, symbol of their tremendous reverence for him and respect for him as someone who was really there for them. As soon as he heard about it, he went right down there. And
that, right. As soon as this happened on Tuesday, and there was this massive response by the New York City Fire Department. I think it's some 20,000 or so. May have that wrong. I think that's about right. And among those was the chaplain, and he went down there because that's his job. That's what he'd done for how long?
About 10 years.
Any idea why he decided to become the chaplain to the fire department?
One of our friars had been a chaplain to the department for almost 20 years and died of cancer, and Michael kind of took over from him and moved into that slot a long time there. Our friary on St. Francis on 31st Street.
Franciscan?
Franciscan friary, right across from the firehouse on 31st Street, Engine 1 and Ladder 24. We've had a long relationship, and Michael slipped into that role, and he and I think 6 other men from that house were killed in the disaster the other day, but he went right across the street and one of those men drove him down there, and he went in to do what he could do as a chaplain to be with the men. That's the kind of guy he was.
I want to talk about the kind of guy he was. How old is he?
68 years old. Probably seemed like he was about 40.
Yeah, well, you look at the picture, and I don't know how current that picture was, but he doesn't look 68 at all when we put it up. He grew up here in New York, do you know?
No, he didn't. Actually, I'm sorry, he is originally from Brooklyn.
Yeah.
He's been a Franciscan for over 50 years, and his family now lives in Maryland. So.
And all of this is horribly sad.
Terribly sad. It just has tremendous impact, obviously, on the fire department for all the different individuals they've lost. But the men across the street in particular, their engine was parked in front of the house for several days with the window blown out in the front, and many people were writing messages of love on there, and they have a picture of Father Michael and the various other men from their house that were lost, and people have been stopping by as many places with flowers and saying a prayer, and it's just a very touching kind of scene.
I suspect the firefighters would say he was as much a part of what they do as they are, that he was a part of their family, and they're trying to show that. Thanks for coming in.
Okay.
You're very patient,
Thank you.
waiting
No
to a number of different things.
Okay.
It's nice to meet you, sir. Thank you very much. The business at hand. The business at hand in many parts of the country is trying to get back to normal. Normal's a difficult thing these days, and air travel is one example of why it is so difficult at busy, very busy Hartsfield Airport in Atlanta. Hartsfield International, CNN's Bonnie Anderson joins us now to update us on that. Bonnie.
Well, if you were to judge just by the terminal, by the numbers of people inside, by the traffic outside, by the comings and goings, it would appear that Hartsfield International Airport is back to business as usual, but it's not yet. While we're still hearing planes overhead, they're only back to a partial schedule. That means there are many more delays, many more people having to wait. But on a day like this, for many of these people, it's also then time to remember.
Plane area is under close video surveillance.
Thousands of passengers going through the now tedious motions of air travel today. But beneath the surface, sorrow.
It's a devastating thing to watch on TV. All you could think about are the families, what they're going through. It absolutely breaks my heart.
For Ruth and John Coleman, hoping to get home to North Dakota today, certain images say it all.
For the people who helped out, like the firemen and the policemen, I mean, who gave their lives, you know, to serve others. I guess that's what really touches my heart a lot.
Just seeing the picture of the policewoman with the 2-year-old at home. It's terrible.
As he waited for a plane to take him home to Utah, Ted Lloyd read his Bible and sent a heartfelt message to those in pain.
Our hearts are with you, and as hard as it is, I know that all of us would love to just put our arms around you and cry with you and support you and know that your Heavenly Father is there.
Chaplain Carol Meredith, who is part of a terrorism response team, sends prayer.
I pray for God's strength for everybody that's involved. Comfort for those who are trapped. Strength for those that are really hurt, the ones that are trapped and are injured severely. Hope for the rescue workers.
At noon today, there was also a moment of silence. All activity stopped inside the terminal. People bowed their head in prayer. And now, with heavy hearts, many of them are continuing on their way home. Aaron?
Bonnie, thank you. Bonnie Anderson in Atlanta. We told you the weather's pretty rocky here in New York. That's affecting the movement of a Navy hospital ship that's coming up, I believe this is correct, from Baltimore. Thinking about memory here anyway. It's having trouble getting into New York Harbor. Down at the Pentagon, Craig During, an Assistant Secretary of Defense, is beginning a briefing on the reserves and the mobilization thereof.
And then they fill it by going out and actually identifying the units or the individuals that they think are best suited to fill those needs. Now, if it's for a mission involving support to civil authorities, the lead federal agency will define the requirement to DOD through the Executive Secretariat and the Director of Military Support. And I think you had a briefing yesterday from Brigadier General Vaughn about that process. So we have to go through that process yet to determine what it is that we need in both cases. The services themselves will identify the units that would be recalled. Now, as for the Air Force, I'd probably have to defer to them to find out why their numbers might be larger than the others. It might have something to do with the air superiority mission, but it would strictly be a guess on my part.
But we've already been told by senior defense officials, in fact by Tory Clark, that the initial ones he expected to be within days. Is that not true?
It's entirely possible. It depends on how long it will take for them to send their requests in, and obviously some thought has gone into this before now. So I'm sure that some are more prepared than others. Yes, sir.
So is this largely the Homeland Defense missions, with the civil support being a smaller portion of this? And what are the Homeland Defense missions specifically?
Well, the civil support, of course, would be, let me start with that first, would be the type of missions that you would see, working with communities, working, trying, the cleanup, the MP type actions, the chaplains, the mortuary affairs, whereas the Homeland Defense missions would be the more military, the traditional military-oriented activities. And again, we'll just have to wait and see what the services ask for. I imagine they're putting their concept of operations together now.
In other words, you don't know which is the larger portion.
I do not know which is larger, quite frankly. I haven't looked at that.
And when you say more military type, can you name
the traditional, from the definition of Homeland Defense.
I mean, fighter pilots, things like that.
Certainly, most of the air superiority mission, if not all the air superiority mission now, is in the Air National Guard, for example.
Has the secretary signed the order for the 26 air bases to enhance air superiority mission at the 26 air bases?
I honestly don't know.
Did the president authorize that, or does he need to do it? Can the secretary do that without authorizing?
I honestly don't know the answer to that, and we might be getting into operational issues here, and I'm just going to steer clear of that today.
You're still sorting out the missions that need to be performed. How did you arrive at the 35,000 figure?
These are the estimates that the services gave us, based on their best planning at this point, and we think it's a pretty accurate number for the need now.
That, or would that be the figure?
Well, of course, under the authorization, they can go significantly over that. But right now, the guidance is that if we were to exceed it by if we were to exceed the cap of 50,000, the Secretary of Defense will coordinate with the President, with the White House, before we actually exceed that limit. So the point I'm making here is that the White House and the Department of Defense are working very closely together on this. This is a well thought out plan, and they're working in concert with each other, and certainly have a handle on what is happening. Yes, sir.
Do you have an estimated breakout by service?
Pentagon spokesman Craig During talking about the mobilization of reserve units in a very broad, general way, talking about what those reservists, whether they be Air Force, Army, Marines, Navy, about 2,000 Coast Guardsmen and women, and part of that. The best guess now, although the President has authorized up to 50,000 reservists to be called up, it'll be somewhat lower than that, perhaps 35,000 at least initially. And you heard him talking about MPs at one point. A lot of that has to do with just helping provide support here in New York and Washington to crews that are tired, weary, and need some help. One of the things that the Secretary of State is demanding of countries is that they stop allowing money transfers from their country to suspected terrorists who might be living in other countries. That's one of the elements of that side of the story. Our David Ensor, national security correspondent, joins us now with more on how some of these items are playing into the investigation. David.
Well, Aaron, before I get to the money, I would like to just mention one aspect of the law enforcement and intelligence side of the investigation that's going on now. U.S. officials tell me that there are still would-be terrorists inside the United States who they believe have the hope of attacking additional targets. They would not offer any details, but they say that there is no reason to believe that all the perpetrators are dead or in jail. So there is a serious amount of concern about that, obviously, and that explains some of the additional security measures that we've seen taken in the last 24 hours or so. Now, in answer to your question, there's a tremendous amount of work being done at the State Department and other parts of the U.S. government trying to build a coalition for this war that they expect to have to be involved in, calls to scores of nations. The message to Muslim nations and moderate Arabs, Pakistan also, is that you must choose sides now. Specifically, they are saying that you must stop the flow of money to bin Laden's coffers. For years, there's been a blind eye turned by many governments to payments sent by wealthy Muslims to charities and other fronts for Osama bin Laden and organizations like his. U.S. officials are saying there could be no more hedging of bets, and they're saying the U.S. will be watching closely to see whether that money flow is actively stopped or not. They are watching now to see whether President Musharraf of Pakistan, who is meeting with advisors today, will be ready after that meeting to say he's going to fully cooperate with the U.S. The U.S. is asking, would he allow overflights in the event they became necessary? Would he allow troops if that was necessary? Will he control his border? Will he stop aid to the Taliban? There's a recognition, officials say, that if he says yes to all of those questions, there is a risk of some unrest in Pakistan. There is a downside for him. Officials are hoping, but they are not sure, that President Musharraf will come down on the U.S. side. The priorities now then are to help New York to solve the crime, build the coalition. On retaliation, that whole subject is not getting too much of the President's attention, I'm told, by senior officials or his cabinet at this point, lower-level people. The Pentagon obviously has to make its plans. Public rhetoric makes it clear that retaliation is going to be foreseen, and they're not ruling anything in or out at this point, Aaron.
I want to go back to the beginning, but let me ask you one question about the end, which is, just in the normal course of business, I assume that military people would put together a plan, an option, or perhaps several options, and then present it to the President. Doesn't need to take his time now.
That's right. The senior people are dealing with those issues I mentioned before. The issues of New York, of the nation, of security here, of solving this crime and preventing any future ones. There are preparations being made for them to be able to consider the what next, the retaliation questions further down the road.
All right, let's go back to the beginning, this troubling piece of information you're hearing. No reason to believe that all the terrorists have been found. And I'm prepared to hear you say this is all they're saying and they won't give us any more, but let me ask it anyway. That's a little different than saying there's no reason that there may still be terrorist plan out there.
I know it is, and that was exactly what I asked. And the answer is you can say it in the positive as well. In other words, there is evidence that there are terrorists in the United States planning additional attacks. So obviously that's a big concern. Aaron.
Let's see if we get, let's build a couple of bridges here. Let's go to Atlanta. Mike Boettcher, who's been covering the investigation in the United States as well. Mike, hearing what David has said and hearing what your sources are telling you, are there any dots you can connect here?
Well, the dots I can connect to the fact that there has been movement of some organizations to the United States over the past few years, evidenced by indictments in North Carolina earlier this year of according to federal prosecutors, members of Hezbollah, who they say were raising money in the United States. And over the course of the past few years, as I've covered terrorism, they've always brought up the specter of sleeper cells. Now, these are people who come into the country, lead normal lives for a period of years, and then are activated for particular missions. And certainly, if you look at the case of people involved in this certain act, I think we're going to find some people who led normal lives here and then all of a sudden were activated. So those are the dots I can throw out there for you right now, Aaron.
The Attorney General, I believe I heard this correctly. Guys, hang around because I'd like to pick up on this. The Attorney General, John Ashcroft, is talking now about the investigation, and we'll pick that up here.
I want to take this time to give you a report in regard to these matters. Today, the Federal Bureau of Investigation released a list of 19 individuals who have been identified as hijackers aboard the 4 airliners that crashed on Tuesday. The FBI requests that anyone who may have information about these individuals, even though these individuals are presumed to be dead, anyone with information about these individuals immediately contact an FBI field office or call the toll-free hotline. The toll-free hotline, as you know, is 1-866-483-5137. 1-866-483-5137. The Federal Bureau of Investigation has also forwarded a list of more than 100 names to numerous law enforcement organizations. These are the names of individuals the FBI would like to talk to because we believe they may have information that could be helpful to the investigation. The organizations that we have submitted these names to include the Federal Aviation Administration, the airlines, FBI field offices, about 18,000 police departments across America, the U.S. Border Patrol, and the U.S. Customs Service. Now, the nature of this list is that it would be changing constantly as people are either removed from it or added to it. But we believe that the individuals on the list may have information that could be helpful to us in our efforts. I want to take this moment to extend our appreciation to state and local law enforcement organizations that have cooperated with this investigation, have acted responsibly, and have been very helpful to us. Their dedication and swift action has been essential to the progress of the investigation. I'm pleased now to call upon the Director to give you some more information.
Before we answer questions, I thought I would fill you in on the extent of the investigation to date. As of today, we have 4,000 FBI special agents who are working on the case in various offices around the country and on various aspects of the investigation, and we have 3,000 support employees also on the investigation. 20 FBI legal offices are running down leads overseas, and all 56 FBI offices around the country are engaged in the investigation. We have conference calls several times a day to make certain that everything is being coordinated appropriately. To date, we have had more than 36,000 total leads. Of those, over 30,000 have come in off the Internet. 3,800 have been received on the FBI hotline, and another 2,400 have been generated through the various field offices. As you well know, and have picked up, we've conducted hundreds of interviews around the country. We've served over 30 search warrants in various places. Hundreds of subpoenas have been issued, and we have, in the course of seizing some of those executing some of those search warrants, we have seized computers, other documentary information that we are following up on. One other point I'd make before we respond to questions, and that is that we have dispatched sent to the various major airports FBI agents, teams of FBI agents, to assist in quickly resolving any incidents that may come up when passengers or passengers are attempting to board an aircraft or obtain a ticket, and there's some question raised, so we can minimize the inconvenience to the person who may well be stopped and also swiftly resolve the issue. And with that, I believe we're happy to take whatever questions you might have.
Director, have you obtained under seal or otherwise any fugitive from justice warrants or leveled any kind of charges against anyone in this investigation?
Well, under seal, I probably couldn't tell you, but I can say that there have been no FBI arrests at this time. Any detentions that have occurred have been pursuant to immigration holds where an individual has been out of status.
On the list of hijackers, have they been connected to organizations connected to Bin Laden?
And I can't get into the details of that.
Astonish you that.
Sorry, we'll take one and then two. Yes, ma'am. Sorry.
Astonish you that they trained, all their training came to the U.S. There were so many of them trained as pilots, and that they lived in the open. They weren't hiding their identities here. Did any of that astonish you or shock you?
Well, the tragedies quite clearly astonish and shock me and the country. The fact that there were a number of individuals that happened to receive training at flight schools here is news, quite obviously. If we had understood that to be the case, we would have, perhaps one could have averted this. But beyond that, I and I think everybody else is just astonished at the extent of the tragedy as a result of what happened last Tuesday. Yes, sir.
Director, there were 2 people removed from the flight last night, I guess, in New York, and those two people's names appeared on a list. How were they able to board if their names were on?
Well, I can tell you that that was pursuant to a watch list. Other than those names were pursuant, were on the watch list for reasons not related to this investigation.
On the list of the hijackers, 2 quick questions. One is there are several shared last names. Were many of them related to one another? And the second question is Delray Beach and Hollywood, Florida seem to be very common residences. Do you know whether those were like bases of operation for these men?
I can't. We are still, while we have the names for the manifests and are still pursuing investigations of those names to try to document and absolutely be certain that the person who went down the plane fits with the name on the manifest. The further association of the names we're still investigating.
What can you tell us about?
All I can say that there are a number of places in the country, without specifying any particular place, where we have conducted a number of interviews and several search warrants, and executed several search warrants.
Tell us about a D.C. police all-points bulletin being put out about a silver or gray minivan. They may be carrying a chemical weapon.
I can't tell you anything about that. Yes, sir.
What have you learned from the cockpit voice recorder and from the flight data recorders of the 2 planes?
They're currently over at the NTSB, and I think the question should be directed to the NTSB on those at this instant.
They referred us to you.
As of this moment, we have not learned or received anything off those recorders. Well, actually, I should say we have not received anything off the voice data recorder. There is that recorder, which is other than the voice data recorder at the Pentagon that we picked up, and we did receive information off that.
What did that tell you about that flight, about its path?
I can't get into that now, sir. Yes, sir.
What confidence do you have the names on the list are actually the people who were on the plane as opposed to aliases or stolen identities? Do you have a level of confidence there yet?
I think we have a fairly high level of confidence, but when we spoke to you yesterday, we had 18 individuals who we believed were the hijackers. We now have a 19th that our investigation has disclosed was probably one of the hijackers on that plane that left Dulles, and consequently, continuous investigation updates our confidence or level of confidence, degree of confidence in assuring that the person who actually was on the plane is associated with the name. Yes, sir.
Have you identified any suspects or individuals who are still at large who may have been the leaders or masterminds of this conspiracy?
I'm sorry, what?
Have you identified any suspects who are, you believe, are still at large in the United States who are the masterminds or leaders of this conspiracy?
I cannot get into the details of the investigation. Suffice it to say, if we believe that there is somebody in the United States who is associated with this conspiracy and we had evidence upon which to base a charge, we would have and would level that charge. Yes, sir.
Can you say anything about the immigration status of the 19? Were any of them out of legal status?
I believe we tried to provide some of those visa details on the listing that we provided to you. I can say that some of them were out of status, yes. I'm not certain how many or which names or which individuals whose names appeared on the manifest and we believe to be a hijacker was out of status. Yes.
It's common for the FBI to name a case agent in a big case. Have you yet done that on this one?
The investigation is being run by Tom Picard out of headquarters here, with Dale Watson and numerous other, I would say, senior FBI agents assisting in various capacities.
And the name of the investigation, sir. Has the investigation been given a name, and what is it?
Pentagon.
The FBI briefing goes on. There are a number of things we want to deal with there. Before we do that, the President is making his way to New York. We have a pool report from the flight from David Gregory, who is the pool reporter on it, and we can listen in on that now.
Gregory traveling with President Bush, where he has just touched down at McGuire Air Force Base in New Jersey. I'm reporting from a government helicopter that is about to take off and accompany Mr. Bush, as he has just boarded Marine One and is preparing to tour the damage around the World Trade Center. The President was greeted upon his arrival just moments ago by Governor Pataki of New York and Mayor Giuliani. The three men were casually dressed, all wearing steamer jackets, windbreakers, and hats. The three men embraced as Mr. Bush got off the plane. Mr. Bush has had a sullen look on his face since emerging before reporters after the service at National Cathedral. Again, if it's difficult to hear, the helicopter is about to take off now. Just 3 days after Air Force One was designated a target by the Secret Service, the security was again extraordinary today. When reporters arrived at Andrews Air Force Base outside Washington, 2 fighter jets were visible patrolling the skies overhead just as the President's helicopter, Marine One, approached Andrews Air Force Base. The flight over, again, a reminder of how tense the Secret Service is about the President's security, as again, a fighter jet was visible within 1 to 2 miles off the right wing of Air Force One, presumably another jet off the left wing as well. The President traveled on Air Force One with a congressional delegation from the tri-state area, and on board with him 9 members of that delegation, including Senators Clinton and Schumer of New York. The President now proceeding to the World Trade Center, and will report later once he gets on the ground after his aerial tour. This is David Gregory reporting with the President in New Jersey.
And that's the pool report with the kind of detail that other reporters, which is where that report goes to, want to hear, including what people are wearing, who's with the President, and so on. If we can get back Betcher and Ensor here, Mike and David, respectfully, there were a couple of things that came up in the briefing that play into the conversation we were having about the possibility that other terrorists are still in the country, where or what they might be. Mike, let me start with you, because you've been working the domestic side of this, as David's been dealing with the intelligence community largely, though not exclusively. Here's how I heard it to the FBI director. We heard reports of a gray minivan carrying a chemical weapon. Can you tell us anything about that? And he said, I can't tell you anything, which tells me literally nothing. So tell me if you're hearing anything about that, what to make of that.
Well, I can tell you I know zip about that. That was a new one, but I will say that there is another list out there, which is right here. There are 52 people on this list, and these are people on a watch list being distributed around the country. Some have already been cleared, so the list is shrinking, but they want to talk to some of these people we don't know as material witnesses or as possible suspects. Aaron?
I want to get to that in a second. David, let me go to you again. There's a lot of things out there right now, and there's a lot of it's rumor and a lot of it's not, or perhaps it's not. We're not sure. Have you heard anything about this minivan? And if you haven't, we'll move on from it.
No, I have not.
Okay.
But they are worried about a number of different kinds of threats. They are not giving details. Yesterday I was in the streets of Washington, and there was a bomb scare we haven't even reported yet, but on Connecticut and M. There may have been nothing to it, but there's a lot of that kind of stuff going on. and a good deal of nervousness among U.S. officials, Aaron.
All right, then let's go back to the beginning of your report some time ago. Sources telling you no reason to believe that all the terrorists have been found. And we were trying to figure out, in a sense, what that meant. And my concern here is on the lower third of the screen, it said other terrorist plots in play or something to that effect. I mean, that may be more to come. Is that what they're saying, that they believe that there is a plot out there that is not yet over?
I started by hearing from someone the negative, the expression that I just gave you, that there's no reason to believe that there are not, that all the perpetrators have been rounded up and are not dead or in jail. So I said, well, can we say it in the positive? Can we say that there are terrorists in the United States that you believe have additional plans to attack